Good afternoon. Here in the UK, things are becoming what one might describe as a bit hot under the collar. Over the last couple of nights, riots have exploded in Northern Ireland. And preceding this, there were also riots in South Coast city Southampton. The thread connecting these two incidents is identity politics, specifically racial identity politics. Many people are alleging that immigration has gone too far and that folk need to take to the streets to demonstrate their objections and frustrations in angry protest.
The violence that was commonplace through the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s is never too far from the surface in Belfast, and so this creates the perfect stage for the chaos to prequel the order. A sickening knife attack by a Sudanese asylum seeker in the city has left the country shocked. It's left it frightened, but most of all, angry.
As people become increasingly fearful of their homes and property being damaged or destroyed, the role of the police is being scrutinised at every juncture. Claims of two-tier policing are abound, and a percentage of politicians and online influencers are complaining that there is too much leniency towards non-native individuals, while calling for the public to take matters into their own hands in mass uprising against the authorities. One particularly vociferous example of this came from Nigel Farage, leader of the political party Reform, who implored the British public to respond to the incidents with cold rage.
The fire service reported 62 separate incidents, with the majority of them, it's claimed, being the property of either migrant families or people of specific racial groups. Now this, of course, is wrong on every conceivable level. Torching the homes of people that haven't attacked anyone, have got no connection to the attacker, other than the fact that maybe they share the same ethnic background or skin tone, is abhorrent. But it's also wholly predictable and 100% inorganic. The scene was not set by Monday's horrific knife attack or any of the countless attacks, false flag or legitimate, that have plagued this country and the West in general for years. It was set by consecutive governments that consistently sold out their populations and their campaign pledges and instead open the doors and the borders to an inevitable outcome on the behalf of the globalist psychopaths in expensive suits. Houses have got locks on the doors for a reason. Nightclubs have bouncers on the doors for a reason. Major sporting or entertainment events have security on the gates for a reason, and nations have borders and defense budgets for a reason. The reason is simple. While most people are good, honest, just and well-intended, some are not. Some are seriously not.
Opposition commentators have described such emotional inflammation as incitement to violence. Similarly, Israeli-sponsored agitator Tommy Robinson has been organising logistical muster points for rioters, while Bond bad guy, trillionaire Elon Musk, has been utilising his online platform, previously known as Twitter, to facilitate the disorder and mayhem.
Now, it's claimed that roughly 1% of the global population is psychopathic. Now, that percentage can waver slightly in certain demographics and can, of course, be affected by childhood trauma, life experiences, whatever, but the 1% estimation seems somewhat consistent. Basically, it's there or thereabouts. So if you allow 100 people into your house, then on average, one of them is going to cause a problem, maybe even a serious problem. Now imagine you've got 1,000 people at a concert or 90,000 people in a football stadium. Well, that average went from 1 to 10 to 900 psychopaths, respectively. Now, if you will, imagine that since the monumental war criminal and digital ID hustler Tony Blair opened the borders of the UK in 1997, there's been an estimated 15 million immigrants entering the UK. 15 million God knows who's from God knows where, with God knows what history behind them. These are also just the numbers they admit to, but let's say, for the sake of argument, 15 million is an accurate figure. Well, 1% of 15 million people takes us from 1 psychopath in your house to 10 psychopaths in the concert to 900 psychopaths in the football stadium to an additional, because let's have it right, we've got psychopaths of our own in the UK as well, an additional 150,000 psychopaths entering this tiny island nation in the last 30 years. Now, tell me with a straight face, if you can, that no one within government, within the civil service, within the Home Office, security services, military, the police, UK Border Force, no one knew that this was exactly what would happen should the front door be left ajar. Of course they knew. It's why they opened the borders. It's why they incentivized mass immigration. It's why they destabilized and bombed Middle Eastern country after Middle Eastern country into oblivion in the very same time frame that they opened the front door.
However, with all that in mind, I would like to be introducing you to a young authoress called Whitney Webb, who has escaped the US in order to continue her research from South America. She is widely considered to be one of the most thorough and courageous investigative writers of these contemporary times. In her two-part book, One Nation Under Blackmail, Webb traces what she argues are historical links between intelligence services, organised crime, financial interests, and political influence, using the Epstein case as a focal point. The book's become particularly popular among readers interested in intelligence history, corruption, and so-called deep state politics. Here's a clip of her discussing events that are contrived to facilitate and engender the reduction and removal of public civil liberties to create what she describes as a neo-feudal society.
In terms of the behavior of like a ruling elite, it's very similar to what it was in the feudal era, like in the Dark Ages, which again, how did the Dark Ages succeed so successfully in that? Extreme control of information. It was all in the church, right? No one knew how to read and write but them. So it was again, centralized control of information and also of money. And we're going to that same paradigm again, but for the modern era. So all this technology is going to try and set up those systems for us. And I think people need to be really aware of all these, in the next couple of years, without a doubt, there's going to be these events, whether it's like COVID or 9/11 or whatever, they're not going to be the same as those, but they're going to be these big events that generate a lot of fear and panic, and mainstream media is going to be traumatizing people with it, and then are going to sell a particular solution. And when it comes for the internet, or the financial system, they're going to make the enemy privacy. They're going to make the enemy privacy 100%. And the solution is going to be digital IDs and programmable, surveillable money. The goal is to have a regulated internet, which means the end of online privacy and anonymity. And they want to do this by having people link a government-issued ID to their internet access. So they need some sort of event that gets people angry and afraid and panicking in order to stick it through. So basically, this is going to be folded into, I guess, what I would call a Cyber Patriot Act. The Patriot Act being the legislation pushed through in the U.S. after September 11th, 2001.
Meanwhile, back in Northern Ireland, local observers of the latest regional troubles point towards the internet as an agent provocateur, and its ability to manipulate impressionable, disaffected indigenous would-be rioters towards collective violence and looting of the innocent.
Well, here in their algorithms, constantly polluting their minds with, they don't read newspapers, they're not read conflict. Nobody wanted to live here. The people who lived here didn't even want to live here, so you weren't getting people coming from other places. So this is quite new. We're a very, very white society. Our police force is incredibly white. There's not a lot of diversity here, and people who have came have only really just started coming since the Good Friday Agreement. So this is relatively new in terms of that. And, I don't want to paint this as an awful, inhospitable place, because it's not. These are a minority, and the majority of the people who are in the streets, they're very young men who are being influenced online constantly by the Tommy Robinsons, the Conor McGregors, the Tates, all of those sort of people who are in their algorithms, constantly polluting their minds with, they don't read newspapers, they're not they're not going to listen to us, they'll never listen to this podcast, but they're getting their misinformation from those places. And it's very easy to say to young men who traditionally from loyalist communities have very low educational achievement and therefore very little prospects when it comes to further education and employment, that the problems that exist in your life are not caused by you. They're caused by that person 2 doors down from you. You know, you convince very, very poor white people that very poor or hard-working brown or black people are responsible for the problems caused by billionaire white men. And that is what is happening. And it's happening quite successfully in terms of how social media is used. And, you know, I believe that Elon Musk did not just blindly buy Twitter. He did it for a reason, to control a lot of those narratives and what's put into the domain. And, you know, I know mothers who have 15, 16-year-old boys who say, if their child is, say, into the gym or into fitness or into anything like that, they look at their computer and all of a sudden they're being bombarded with this far right, you know, men should be men, you know, far macho, misogynist, patriarchal nonsense. And that's what's being done to a lot of these young men. That is no excuse for their behaviour. But if you think about, there's no logic to a lot of it. I mean, we have a man from Sudan, and the PSNI came out at 12 o'clock in the day to say this was a man he was originally from Sudan. This is the road he took. This is his path. He was here legally, all of that. And the next thing you know, you have a Turkish barber's being set on fire. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason or link to what is happening here. It is just wildly attacking anyone who might look slightly different.
You touch on it a little, this idea of poverty and poverty of opportunity for some of these young men who were out on the streets last night. You know, there are politicians who say, you know, there are concerns around services, around housing, around jobs, and that has to be laid on the door of the politicians, doesn't it?
Well, it's politicians who make these decisions and who make these laws and legislation and who direct the funds to where they're meant to be directed to. You know, it's not the person who, you know, owns the barber shop or the car worker or, you know, the person working in the agri-food sector or any of those people. It is the politicians who are making these laws in terms of housing provision, educational provision, all of those things. You know, the person who was attacked and who was in hospital being treated for very serious injuries, the people who would have been treating him on their 12-hour shift would have came from all around the world. There would have been people from Northern Ireland and also people from every corner of the world. And, you know, I thought last night as I was standing watching houses being bricked and set on fire and people fleeing for their lives, how many of those people who were treating that man came out and couldn't go home after their 12-hour shift, after trying to save the life of the person they're now rioting for. But what did happen, and I don't want this to sound hopeless, is there was also people who were getting phone calls from their neighbours saying, like, don't go out, tell me what you need. Do the kids need milk? Do they need anything for school? I'll go and do it. Do you want to bring the children over and put them to bed in my house and they'll be okay here? There was people who were, you know, sent in doing a taxi service and going and collecting nurses and everyone else from their place of work to get them home safely. So that, you know, this is not a place full of racists and it's inhospitable, but there is a minority who are being controlled and controlled very well through false narratives. Some of it is just misinformation because people are fed a diet of that constantly, but a lot of it is very deliberate disinformation set out to cause unrest among communities, and we are a place that knows an awful lot about unrest among different communities.
And you also know an awful lot about distrust in the police historically. Victor, it's very clear yesterday, the PSNI chief came out and appealed for calm very, very directly.
This all leads to an understandable and logical conclusion that censorship and a curtailment of freedom of speech is the obvious deterrent for lawlessness. In order to keep you safe, we're going to have to abandon any commitment we have to civil liberties, playing directly into the hands of those societal manipulators of whom Whitney Webb and others are alluding to.
Now, tell me with a straight face, if you can, that no one within government, within the civil service, within the Home Office, security services, military, the police, UK Border Force, no one knew that this was exactly what would happen should the front door be left ajar. Of course they knew. It's why they opened the borders. It's why they incentivized mass immigration. It's why they destabilized and bombed Middle Eastern country after Middle Eastern country into oblivion in the very same time frame that they opened the front door. Syria, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Palestine, Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia. And the West have absolutely had their grubby little mitts all over the civil war in Sudan, the very war-torn nation that Belfast knife attacker came to the UK from. Now remember, General Wesley Clark's 2007 admission that he'd been privy to a memo in 2001 stating that the US planned to topple 7 countries in 7 years. Well, compare that list of nations with the ones I listed earlier. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Iran, and wait for it, Sudan. None of what is happening in Lebanon, in the Strait of Hormuz, in Ukraine, and on the streets of Belfast is by accident or random or disconnected. It's all part of a coordinated and pre-planned chaos from which the very demons that created it can introduce their much coveted order. An order that will strip every single one of us, irrespective of our skin color, religion, or any other aspect of our existence that can be seen as a barrier between us, of our freedoms, of our human rights, of our privacy, of our dignity, and of our humanity. Literally of our humanity as the AI takeover rolls on. But not content with simply stripping us of everything it is to be a free human being. Now that's not enough. See, they want us to beg for it.
Order out of chaos. I think it might be a Freemasonry idiom, adage. Problem, reaction, solution. The Hegelian dialect. Identify the desired synthesis, for example, ending the rights and freedoms of the people, and then contrive and orchestrate the preceding thesis and antithesis with which to bring about the public's submission. Or better still, the public's requests.
The order out of chaos play is one as old as time, and its continued success can be put down to, in large part, its simplicity. See, you create the problems within the society or the group you wish to specifically target at that time, whether that be economic, through a war, either civil or overseas, or whatever, and then you wait for the problem to fester, to build, for fear, desperation, and unrest to spread among the population, and then you wade in with the answers to all those manufactured problems. And those answers just so happen to be the very answers you've had designs on all along, but knew without the problems and turmoil you've now created would never have been accepted. Like I say, it's simple, but I get it. If I was vastly outnumbered by the people I want to force down a path of my choosing, then physically dragging them is off the table. Numbers don't stack up on that one. And to try and persuade, gaslight, incentivize, or intimidate them into submission, well, that's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of resources, with very little guarantee of success. So instead, I'd take a leaf out of the order out of chaos playbook and create the scenario where, instead of resisting my demands, they beg for them.
World example of exactly this inversion of common sense and protections of freedoms. Here's an alternative news and media outlet with a mission statement to resist fascism and promote humanitarian values. The unsuspecting hosts are calling for an increased truncation or shutdown of freedom of expression. Quid pro quo, amigos. It's subtle, but maybe that's why it's so powerful and effective at creating oppression and tyranny. Give us more government. Give us more of your authority. Control us more. Save us. Protect us.
Now, yesterday it was revealed that the alleged perpetrator, Hadi Aladid, had made his way from Sudan to Dublin before taking a bus across the open border into the north of Ireland. There, the UK Home Office, then run by the Tories, granted him leave to remain in 2023. That has, of course, now been used to score political points by some of Britain's right-wing parties. On Tuesday, Restore Britain leader Rupert Lowe posted this. The Sudanese man arrested for the attempted beheading was granted leave to remain in the UK by the Home Office, led by now Reform MPs Braverman and Jenrick, on the 28th of September 2023. On the 26th of October 2023, 1 month later, Jenrick formally answered a parliamentary question with the following statements. The UK has a proud history of supporting refugees. The UK is proud to have welcomed Sudanese nationals. We also welcome eligible Sudanese nationals through our refugee family reunion route. This is what Reform's Shadow Chancellor has said about welcoming unvetted Sudanese fighting-age men. It is scandalous. I want to know exactly what Jenrick and Braverman knew about these Sudanese men when they were allowing them to stay in Britain. What checks were made, criminal records, anything. They were welcoming young men from a brutally backward country that has an entirely alien culture, completely incompatible with our way of life. Why let them in? Why do it? Why endanger British men and women? How many more did they let in? I'm putting a number of formal questions, freedom of information requests to the Home Office to obtain that information. Jenrick and Braverman were responsible for our borders. They held the power. They let this man in and then handed him a visa. It is sickening, a disgraceful failure that must never be forgotten. Lowe sort of expanded on that theme today, posting this. I want people finally held to account for what has been done to our country. Civil servants, judges, politicians. If they have knowingly placed unvetted, dangerous, third world savages in our communities, near our children, then the Restore Britain government will aim to prosecute them. If that includes reforms Robert Jenrick and Squalor Braverman, then so be it. When they held the power, they welcomed that Sudanese monster into our country and handed him a visa. An attempted beheading followed their decision. Those responsible must be held to account. And I want to send a very clear message to officials planning to place more of these men in communities across Britain, near schools, nurseries, families. When Restore Britain wins the next election, we will pursue you with the full power of the state. That will apply retrospectively. If those in power are made to feel the consequences of their decisions, the quality of those decisions will improve. We are so far past half measures now. The country is too far gone. Britain needs a democratic revolution. That is exactly what Restore Britain is going to do. I mean, you have to wonder, prosecute them under what law exactly? I mean, I guess that will be part of the Restore manifesto, the next general election. Now, some have pointed at agitators in America as being in part responsible for last night's violence, including ex-owner Elon Musk. He posted his approval of Lowe's prosecution, saying, quote, "This is the way." But in the hours before the violence, he also posted this to his 240 million followers. Only by protesting repeatedly and loudly will there be change, he wrote, while reposting a tweet from Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, calling for the whole of the UK to hit the street in the wake of the, quote, "yet another invader attack. It's time," he said. And those graphics, especially the one on the right, ordering Belfast businesses to close in certain areas, were circulating amongst others calling for young men over 18 to come out, masked up and ready to fight. So that graphic that Elon Musk has put out there is very, very close to linked to graphics circulating on Twitter ahead of that violence. Indeed, Musk posted that ahead of the violence, as well as other graphics, basically calling up, young fighters to come out and beat people up. Now, it's likely that it's that kind of intervention that's led Ofcom to write to social media companies, warning them that it has, quote, already launched investigations into several platforms, arguing that they appear to have been used to incite last night's violence, and reminding the platforms of their duty to, quote, assess and mitigate the risks of illegal activity occurring on their sites and apps under 2023's Online Safety Act. Aaron, at the beginning of the show, you talked about uncorking the bottle. I wrote a question down, which is the genie truly out of the bottle now when it comes to race-based violence in this country?
Well, 100%. And it's only going to be made worse by the presence of people like Elon Musk so prominently. He wants to fund political parties in this country. I think there's a really terrific argument to shut down X. I mean, I don't think I'd go there just yet. But a story alongside this is in the last 48 hours, but particularly yesterday and the day before, every third image on X was Nigel Farage chasing Andrew Bailey on BBC Question Time. These were fake AI-generated images. One was Farage with a gun. And you just think, what crazy world are we now in where the world's first trillionaire, which is what Musk is going to become, owns a platform, he has 250 million followers, and every third image is a politician whose party is polling first, chasing the governor of the Bank of England with a gun, and I presume this was advertising a crypto scam or something. We don't have to do this. We don't have to do this. It's clearly having an impact on the quality of conversations in this country. I don't want to do censorship. I think it's generally bad. I think X is a great net good over the last 15 years. It certainly has been for me. Environment Media probably wouldn't exist without it. But now you're crossing a line where I think Elon Musk was getting very, very close to incitement there, personally. And when he has absolutely no grasp of the facts, often when he's talking about these things, he's not in the UK. He's not that familiar with British politics. I have major problems with it.
You mentioned riots every 6 months. I mean, we've had two in the space of a week, right, based around issues of race and sort of, white grievance of some kind. On the Musk thing, I'm not really for censorship either, but that doesn't mean that I'm not for legal controls on media platforms, right? A newspaper can't print what it wants to a large audience in order to damage someone's reputation. You can't go on TV and break reporting restrictions in court cases, or start, identifying the child victims of sexual assault in those trials. And you also can't go on TV, because you're governed by Ofcom there, and start inciting people to violence. And if we think of the media company as a broadcaster, which in some sense, it's not a broadcaster in the traditional sense of TV images, but it certainly is broadcasting to huge audiences. Controls are surely appropriate. That's not censorship, right? That's just that's
no, it's
control.
not censorship. But I'm saying if you went to the extent of banning X,
Sure.
Of course there are many good people on X sharing very valuable information. I'd like to think Novara Media does that, for instance. That would obviously be unfair on them. But as a society, you have to make a cost benefit as to what this platform is doing. And I think we're starting to get to the point where you do have that conversation. That would be censorship on good voices, and it would be justified on the bad voices. In terms of the legislation and regulation of these spaces, has to happen. Any conversation about the Makerfield by-election on broadcast TV, from GB News to Sky to BBC, if you mention the by-election, if you mention one candidate, the presenter then has to read out all the candidates. They say, this by-election is on this date, it's happening here, these are the candidates. They're legally obliged to do it. And yet you see the Wild West on social media, which, by the way, includes us. We can talk about the by-election in a fundamentally different way than broadcast media can. In a way, I think that's kind of unfair, actually. If we have a clip on social media, on YouTube rather, that gets 500,000 views, and that's not regulated, but then BBC, Sky, GB News are all regulated, Channel 4 News, we probably do need that conversation. So I'm saying that from a place where actually it doesn't necessarily benefit us, but some light touch regulation on this stuff, on the platforms, YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, I think is long overdue. And one final point, if anything, maybe this stuff will make people take the state seriously again. The state needs to be present. The state needs to be strong. In Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland, what you see is a state that isn't strong with regards to a police presence, or a state that could provide adequate housing, right? The state needs to be strong. People need to be respectful of the state. That used to be a sort of de facto socialist position until quite recently. And I feel like a Westminster government imposing the democratic will of the people, who of course have voted in that government, on people like Musk and X, I think is long overdue. We need to have political oversight of runaway finance and economic capital. We have to. That's the nature of what democracy is meant to be. Right now we're not doing it because we come out of this end of ideology slipstream, end of the Cold War, where actually politics can't invade on economic life. And it's long overdue we correct that. It has to.
Remember, it can, yeah.
It can, and it has to, because if it doesn't, Stephen, we're going to lose democracy. And I don't say that lightly. We're going to lose democracy. We're going to lose the rule of law. We're going to lose a lot. I'm not just talking about like the nice things that you might associate with multiculturalism. I mean, quite basic things that are actually inherent to human flourishing. We have to take that seriously, that possibility. And that's why the state, I think, now needs to take itself seriously.
Aaron mentioned regulation of YouTube there and other platforms. Just to assure our audience, we are not completely unregulated as an organisation. We're regulated by the Impress Code, and we stick to it very carefully to ensure our journalism is fair and good. I've got one last question for you, which is about Rutlo's language in those tweets about Sudanese people. He was doing exactly that thing of taking one case and saying, all Sudanese people are like this. And he was critical of the Tories for welcoming Sudanese refugees at that point, at a time where people were plausibly saying, and still ongoing, that there was a genocide occurring in Sudan.
Yeah.
What do you, I mean, for me, when I see rhetoric like that, in Germany, you would have a very hard time being a politician and using rhetoric like that for obvious reasons to do with Germany's past. Here, it's completely fine. And it sits so uneasily with me that this is like the level of kind of political discourse we have in Parliament, where entire groups by a parliamentarian can be described as, I can't remember what he said, like, vile savages or something like that. Those weren't his exact words, but he definitely used the word savages. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, you can have a very radical critique and even offer quite radical proposals while not sort of, I wouldn't say even lapsing, going into that kind of territory, right? Someone like Peter Hitchens, he supports the death penalty. He says you have to have capital punishment in order to do X, Y, Z. Japan does it. Nobody thinks Japan is an uncivilized country, has much lower, rates of crime than we do. Actually, it's very rarely used in Japan. But regardless, that would be his argument, for instance. Now, I've talked to Peter about that on Novara Media, and I've told him why I disagree. But you can make those radical arguments about the death penalty. Somebody might be saying that this man who did this awful crime should face the death penalty, or he should be deported. You can make those arguments without saying that everybody from this country is a savage, right? That is not necessary. And it's not helping your argument because it's also not true. But you are right. This is a very new thing in British politics. I suppose one way it was justified is that he was referring to comments made by Robert Jenrick 3 years ago. I mean, it is extraordinary, Stephen, that Robert Jenrick went from that guy at the dispatch box in the House of Commons. You know, it's not a tweet. He was working on behalf of, at the time, Her Majesty's government to implement, national policy as part of his brief as a member of a government cabinet, or I think he was a junior minister, but, he was a senior person in the last government. And in 3 years, he's gone to where he is now. It's not 25 years. It's not a Damascene conversion where, Oswald Mosley is here and then 25 years later he's here, or Enoch Powell before the Second World War is here and then by the 1960s he's here. It's 3 years. There are people watching this who have cans of beans in their cupboard from 3 years ago, right? So that journey that Jenrick's been on, I think really underscores how little he actually believes in politically. And given his role as, quote unquote, the shadow chancellor for the party that's now number one in the polls in this country, has been over hundreds of polls, that's a concern. I would say he's the biggest charlatan / opportunist we've had in politics in this country for a very long time. And he could be very powerful very soon.
It's very hard for me not to think that, in using language like that, they are in fact fanning these flames. That's the point of that language, to make it legitimate, to make it usable, and therefore to make it sort of, with language comes actions. What the more you're permitted to say, the more you're permitted to do in many cases, I think.
Yeah.
Very worrying, very worrying.
So clearly, this media outlet, this vehicle for altruistic viewpoints, is very comfortable with closing down freedom of speech, freedom of expression, unless it's a chat about the Japanese state killing people. That seems to be an okay conversation to have. But the mention of good and bad voices, that one got me interested. Because once people very earnestly tell you, that their judgment on what is good to say and what is bad to say is, sacrosanct, gospel truth, it raises the red flag. Alarm bells are ringing, right? Because they're not seeing it from a macro, bigger picture, when their belief in good and bad overrides the rest of society. And to close, they assured us, rest assured, they said, audience, we are regulated by the state. We cannot say whatever we want because the state oversees freedom of speech, and we are curtailed, truncated, restricted. Have a nice day.